All right, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are here with the Global Food Justice and Health Equity video series sponsored by the University of California Health Initiative, Global Health Initiative, and it is June 1st, 2022. And I'm so excited today. We have a special guest. Want to welcome Mr. Keith Hudson. And Keith Hudson is the founder and head of Grocery Croppers. And it is an awesome program in Sacramento, California, and they specialize in cultivating possibility, responsibility, commitment, community, and service. And they also produce food at home and teach others how they can become more self-reliant as well. So together with this platform, we'd like to welcome him, and we're going to talk to Keith today. Hi, Keith.
Hello, Cheryl. Thank you for that introduction.
Awesome, awesome. So, tell us, just introduce yourself in your own words and tell us a little bit about your work, your organization, in the context of food justice and health equity. And feel free to discuss even from a local or a global lens if that applies to you.
Well, Grocery Croppers is more like a baby to me than it is a business. I started, I want to say I started like 10 years ago, but we became an official business like 5 years ago. But I really started longer than that. My grandmother, I'm from Chicago. My grandmother's from Mississippi, and she had a small farm in Chicago. And the name Grocery Croppers actually comes from her. I'm like the smallest person in my family, so she would always send me out to get food and pick stuff. And like any other kid, I didn't know what was what. I just ate what was put on my plate. And so one day I was like really annoyed, and I asked her, why do I always have to go out there to get food? And I said, why don't you go grocery shopping like, normal people? And she was like, we don't grocery shop, we grocery crop. And so the name kind of came from there. And then I moved to California about 16 years ago, and I noticed that I was living in South Sac, near where I own my home at now. And I just noticed that it was like a food desert. I had lived all over the country with my dad, who has his own business. He does construction. And in a lot of the places that I lived in, they had farms, or they had people that were growing food, or they just had access to healthy, fresh fruits and vegetables. And I noticed there was a lack of that here in the area that I was living in South Sacramento. So I started to grow food in the on the balcony at first, and then I started to grow food in the alleyway where the parking was at. And then I moved downtown some years after that, and I started growing food downtown as well in the apartments. And I don't know what happened. Just a light switch just came on in my head, because I do know what happened. Somebody stole my raised beds and like took all of the food that I had growing out there. And so then it was like a light bulb just came on, and I was like, instead of getting mad or trying to do something stupid, I could just teach other people how to grow their own food. And then we could just share food instead of them, coming and taking the food. And slowly I started to talk to people in the community about growing food. And I saw that there was a true need for not just the food, but the education itself on growing the food. So I started to make what I call sub-irrigated planters, and I just started to give them out to people in the neighborhood. And it was kind of like I don't want to say a barter system, but we just were sharing. So if I was growing tomatoes, I would show them how to grow peppers. I started most of the plants myself, and I was really the person taking care of all the plants, but it was a really cool thing. And then from there, I just started to work with different people in the community. I met the Yisrael family, Kanoke. He's in Oak Park, and I started going over there and working with him. I actually tried to work on as many small farms here in the Sacramento area as I possibly could. And then when COVID happened, it kind of kicked us into high gear because we were called by Councilmember Carr's office to be on the COVID relief team. And so we put together a program to help. Miss Ross was involved, Miss Effie was involved, Luther Burbank High School was involved, and a couple of other like community people. So we put together a task force to kind of help people learn to grow. Like I said, why grocery shop when you can grocery crop? So I built out a bunch of SIPs. I think I donated like 40 SIPs to Luther Burbank. And then,
Now, what is a SIP? Tell us what a SIP is.
okay, I may have one sitting right here. So a SIP is a sub-irrigated planting box. They like sell them at Home Depot sometimes. They're called city slicker farms and things of that nature, but they cost a lot of money. It's something that you can really build on your own using repurposed materials. You can use totes, buckets, milk crates, whatever you want. And basically, we just put a reservoir on the bottom to house the water, soil on top, and you feed the water in through a tube, or you know how you have a regular pot and you sit it into like a little round bowl shaped something at the bottom to hold water. That's basically a SIP itself, a sub-irrigated planter, because you can pour the water into the bottom and then, you know, capillary action pulls the water up into the soil as the plant needs it. So we started creating those. I was already making SIPs though. That's what I was growing all of my stuff in after someone had, you know, took all of my food. So we started to do the SIPs and that kind of took off. But before that, we kind of took off just working with the Israel Family Farm, Nelson down at Weed Grow. I worked with Alfred over at Three Sisters. Him and Nelson share a farm together in West Sac on Cummins Way. So I would always be able to help those guys out. Sarah Seedlings. There's a lot of different people here in Sacramento that I actually was working with because I do start a lot of plants. And I have to send shout out to James Brady. So what really propelled me was James Brady. So he and I have the same barber, which is kind of funny. My barber was always telling me about, I'm gonna introduce you to James. I'm gonna introduce you to James. And I was already familiar with who James is because he also does sub-irrigated planters. So one day I was at the barbershop and he says, and me and James are talking and I don't know that it's him, right? So we in there talking. My barber set me up. So we're in there talking, and then he says there's only 3 people in Sacramento who are doing what we're doing. James is saying this about himself. And then he says him, Canoke, and then he says you. And I'm like, wait a minute, who are you, dude? Like, who is this OG telling? Like, how do you know who I am? It was like, yeah, I'm James. So then he like introduced himself. It was kind of funny. It's a good story. And he hooked me up with Councilmember Carr. That was my first introduction to Councilmember Carr. They were building a greenhouse for the Boys and Girls Club right across from Consumer Rivers College. And he needed plants. And I have a greenhouse and I start hundreds of plants. I start a lot of plants because I love to grow. So I donated maybe like 300 plants to this greenhouse that they were building. And from there, that's what really propelled me. That's when I knew that it was something that was more than just like a hobby or something I enjoyed doing, but it was a real need in the community, not just in my community, but all around for my service, as I like to call it. So, I mean, I don't know. That's like the short end of the story. And now, when I got injured a few years back, I got injured 6 years ago and then re-injured 3 years ago. So when I got injured, I kind of switched the gears and started to really educate people. So I started to put together like little videos and posts about growing and just going out to the community and going to people's homes and actually showing them how to plant their own food, how to build sub-irrigated planters, how to tend for their gardens. And I mean, the rest is history. And now I got a logo. And I still do the same thing though. You know, I invite people to my home. We have skill shares at the house. My wife actually cooks the food that we're that we harvest. She's a health coach, so she's always doing videos about the food that we're harvesting, always educating people, and we actually educate people about grocery cropping on her platform as well. I
So it's a
feel
family. This is a family business
yes.
that grew um, out of some family traditions that I hear you got from your grandmother, and now you've passed that on to your family, and you're educating the community. So tell me, what kinds of health conditions and other challenges do you see that helped you to want to increase people's knowledge and understanding about health equity, food justice? Tell me a little bit about what you see in terms of health conditions. Do you see people getting really sick, or like you said, you told the story about someone who stole your plant? So do you think that people want this but they just don't know how to do it? What do you think that is? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Okay, so I do see that people want this but don't know how to do it. The first thing for me was, like I said, I'm living in South Sac at the time, and I have a lot of brothers. I have a pretty big family, and I'm the oldest of all of them. I have one sister. And something that, is synonymous in any family is kids kind of act out when they're hungry. When you're hungry, you really don't know what to do. You'll do anything for some food. So the first thing that I noticed when I moved here, I maybe was here for like 2 years or so. Like I said, there was no access to just fresh food. And I would see kids eating these chips all the time and just outside just doing anything. I like to cook, so I would barbecue quite often and make salsas and things of that nature with the food that I was growing. So the first thing that really made me think that grocery croppers was important, or me growing was important, was it wasn't really a illness, so to speak, but it was a sickness of these kids being deprived of, like, nutrient dense foods or just local foods. Like, the people were going to Walmart, not saying anything bad about Walmart, or maybe I am, but people were going to Walmart, and they own a subsidized income already, or they getting, help from the government, and they spending their money on what they thought they should have, chips, and it wasn't food though. And I'm a person that talk a lot too. So I started talking to the kids in the community. And like I said, I was growing food already. So I would just invite kids into the yard, and then I knew most of the parents, and I started to see the difference in the way the kids reacted. When they saw me outside, they're like, oh, that's the guy that grows food. They want to come over, they want to taste the tomatoes. They want to pick peppers. They want to taste greens. They weren't worried about bugs. They weren't worried about washing it off. They wanted to taste it. They were interested not only in what I was doing, but in the flavor, in the food itself. So I do think, for me, education is very important. And I say this often, and it's not, I don't mean it in a bad way, but we live amongst a ignorant populace. Like, the population is not that bright. They don't know where food comes from. They don't know how to plant food. And if everything went to darkness tomorrow, it would be bad. They would be stealing my raised beds again because of fear. So it really was born out of neglect and fear. I see that there is a need for at least this education, even if no one's growing their own food. Just the knowing of how to grow your own food is important. There are a lot of people who suffer from, I don't want to say foodborne illnesses, but things that are related to food, sicknesses that are related to food. But for me, the main thing is like malnutrition. We have a highly malnourished population, especially for people of color, because they're spending their money on what they think they should be eating instead of what they should be eating. So I think the main, like I said, the main thing that I really see and this is all across in any state that I lived in, not just in California. This is everywhere I lived, in Chicago, in Georgia, in Mississippi, Alabama, everywhere that I've been. When when the when you're in a community that doesn't have access to these fresh fruits and vegetables, they won't purchase fresh fruits and vegetables when they go to the store because they're not accustomed to seeing fresh fruits and vegetables. So it's like that. I can't think of the name of the movie, but they like, if you build it, they will come. So that is the best way to get people involved, is for them to see this stuff. And kids are curious. My goal is to help out the kids, because if the parents see it, then the parents get interested and want to know what's going on as well. And then they're more likely to provide this outlet or somewhere for the kids to grow. So it's really more about sickness of the mind and being malnourished.
I love it. I like the way you shape that, because the children motivating you is what helped you to make the connection between your knowledge, growing healthy food, sicknesses, illness, anxiety. I mean, I heard you cover a lot of things that you just don't normally think about when you think about food justice. It just doesn't come to mind. So I wonder, as we, keep rolling through this conversation, how are you now? So you're like 3 years in, are you 5 years in, 10 years in? How long have you been doing this?
So as an actual business, I am about 5 years in, but here in California, I'm really a little more than 10 years in.
So now 10 years in, 5 years business, 10 years total, honing your craft. How are you now thinking about programs like ours? Like, how can food justice researchers and academic advisors, health professionals and doctors, how can we help you from where you sit, where you work? How can we begin to help you take your work to the next level?
So now with what I'm going through as well, because like I said, I was injured 6 years ago and then re-injured like 3 years to the date of that injury, right? So now I research more on nutrient dense foods. Like I'm really big now on orphan crops, I guess they're called. Like I want to grow the food that actually belongs in the region. You know what I mean by that? Like, so I feel like we have gotten to a place where it's the same thing as I said earlier. You just go to Walmart and purchase what you think you should have because you don't see it, you know what I mean, readily available. And so now I'm looking at what should be growing in what regions. We grow a lot of food in places that it doesn't belong, or that is not necessarily from. It's not its origin. So I'm like like I love Carrie because we always have these kind of conversations about like orphan crops and what should be grown where and the origin of different things. So that's like my thing now, is growing the food that belongs in that area for the people, what, not just what's been naturalized to a situation like tomatoes, or peppers. That's something that we're growing everywhere, but it doesn't originate in a certain place. So I'm now looking at things like hibiscus and agastache and these native crops that came out of these regions that aren't looked at as foods, they're more looked at as weeds. Like plantain grows everywhere and they spray it to kill it, not the fruit, not the big herb tree, but this little plant that they used to call I think they called it the settler's footprint or something like that. So nasturtium, that's something that grows everywhere. No one's looking at it as a food source. So I do a lot of research on these things, and I do get a lot of help from Carrie. I'm on ResearchGate all the time, looking at these different plants and their origin and how they got to be looked at as weeds or why they aren't considered foods anymore. I look at the First Nations and what they were eating and why we don't eat those things anymore, or why they aren't looked at as food. Everything come back to money. If you can't commodify it, or turn it into a commodity, then that is like, why are we growing this? We can't throw this on the stock market. But in these academic spaces, this is where I get this information from, because no one on these farms is talking about this, because they're growing what the government tell you should grow, or what the USDA tells you should grow, or what this food pyramid tells you should grow. And even a lot of those foods aren't nutrient dense, and they aren't supplying the populace with real food. Like I don't like
How
using
to
the
Eat
word
to
food.
Live. How to
Yes,
Eat to Live. You remember that book?
yes, 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 yes,
That's
yes.
what I'm
I've
hearing
read
from
them.
you is basically, grocery croppers is about how to eat to live and understanding what that means. Well, we definitely see a way that the Global Health Institute and our Center of Expertise could assist you with getting this message out and expanding it. And maybe even really working on a very specific research grant, maybe some kind of specialty crop where we begin to understand, how could something like this go to scale? Like, I could see you setting a goal every year for the next 10 years. So, how, like the United Nations, they do like a 10-year, 20-year, the World Health Organization, a 10-year, 20-year plan. I could see you creating a 10-year plan that every year you're going to start maybe with 10, and then that 10 would turn into 20, the 20 turn into 40. So by the end of 10 years, you could easily have over 300 grocery croppers, operating all throughout California and maybe even the world. So I'd love to work with you to kind of explore this next generation of our grant series. We got funded again to continue till June 2023. I think it is. I think it's June 2023. So I'd love to spend some time talking with you. We got to regroup for the fall, and by September, talk about how do we get you in some grants and maybe enroll you in the urban farming program, so that you can really start picking up the agricultural and the business of agriculture, the business of food, and let us work with you to create the business of health equity, food justice. Like, we know what happens on the other side of the business of food, but how do we create a business model for food justice and health equity? And what type of equipment and innovation would be needed? What kind of workforce do we need to create to scale that to feed the whole city of Sacramento, for example? I think we could look at some things like that. So wow, I'm just really impressed with what you're doing. I love the family aspect. So what kind of tools? I heard you talk about the planter. So I want to. Do you have a picture, or will you send us something later? Do you have something you can show that we
Yes,
could
I
look
will send you
at?
guys some. I have some. I got my background turned off because my wife got a
Oh, no worries. We understand. We're all at
bunch of
home
stuff going on. Yeah,
too. Don't
she
you
getting ready for a
worry.
pop up. But I do
Awesome.
have I have a bunch of sips here at the house that I'm actually growing in. So I'm not only a client, I'm not only the owner, but I'm also a client of myself. So I'm probably growing in about 30 sips in my backyard right now, and I have some sips that I built out. Like I said, when we did the program with Council Member Carr's office, I built like 50 or 60 sips. And I donated most of them to the Luther Burbank High School. And this was like at the start of COVID, so they were doing the distance learning. So that was really cool because they gave them all to a bunch of kids who were already in the agricultural program. And So I have a bunch here at the house. I'm actually gonna start putting. I'm gonna do an intense grow with this moringa and just move it all around to see how it does throughout the winter time. So I'm actually gonna start them really late too and try to grow them into the winter just to see what they'll do. But as far as tools go, like I'm old school. I use my hands for everything. I'm digging in the soil with my hands. Like other than the computer and doing this research books, I'm a person that I love to be informed, first of all. So I have like an intense library of books on planting methods and plants and herbs. I love tea, so I'm growing a lot of herbs. So like for me, like I said, I'm old school. The number one tool is these hands and this mind. Because like I said, if all the lights went out and I didn't have a shovel or anything else, old school, I'm gonna get out there with a stick, move the soil, and then I could dig it up with my hands. So the most important tool, which is one that I'm creating right now, I did the e-planting guide, but I am actually, and I like the fact that you said build this out over 10 years and have more grocery croppers, because I have family all over the place, so I'm actually implementing a program with my family to start to grow. The one that I know is going to happen within this next year is in Yazoo, Mississippi, which is where my grandmother was from. We have a few acres out there, and my cousin is actually about to do a little grocery cropping thing out there. And we're going to do virtual classes for the people in their neighborhood to show them how to grow. So we're doing like a little permaculture design center out there, which we started on a few months. Well, I haven't touched anything. I'm just like consulting over the phone, but we started on a few months ago. So uh, the most important tool is the education, is the books, is anything that people can learn from. That's the tools that I'm creating for myself, and those are the tools that I actually use most for myself. So like I said, I have the e-guide, but I'm also putting together a top 10 best plants to grow with ease of grow and the most nutrient dense. And those plants, of course, are going to be regional, so it won't be like unanimous on what those 10 would be for every different area, but I'm going to try to do it by zone, by USDA zones, by the growing zone. So
That's awesome. Awesome. I want to get my copy. Please tell me where I will be able to order my copy. And I want the little grocery cropper booklet. I'll reach out to you after because I want to have a live copy so I can feature it on our site and have it
mhm.
nice picture of it so it's on our website and everyone knows. So you need to get ready because they're gonna want to buy one too, people. I'm
I'm
not gonna
excited
be
about
the
that.
only one. Yeah,
I'm
everybody's gonna buy. It
excited.
looks really interesting, and it's like a planting guide. I think that's just amazing, and we'd love to have you back after you get your courses going. If there's anything that we can do to support you in developing the courses, like setting up your some research to like have some anchors that you share with other people and then still bring them in as subject experts like yourself, we can help you with that. How to organize everything for the publishing, and we should definitely think about some publishing by the end of the year. So please call on us in the center. That's what we're here for. Dr. Carey couldn't be here today. She's actually off teaching, so she had myself and Ken, who's my colleague. He manages all the virtual platforms. So if you need any support in that area, that's why we're here. We want to help you do what you do better,
Man,
and
I
reach more
appreciate that.
people, you know?
I appreciate that. And one thing I will say, like, since the day that I met Carrie, everything has just, man, I love Carrie, first of all. She is an amazing human being. Like, we talk all the time about this research, and like, I don't have a, a history, that background, to certain people. It's really experience. It really comes from my grandmother, and I'm like, so my other company is called Starving Student because I love to learn. So I'm like a starving student. I'm always researching stuff. I'm always reading. Like that's the real reason why I got my background turned on, because this room that I'm in is just full of books and plant stuff. Like it's ridiculous, but it's my safe space. You know, this is what I love to do. I love to grow. I love to teach people about growing. And that's kind of how the e-guide came about too, because I would have people that call me all the time. Like I'm always available to people to answer questions about growing and planting. And I was like, I need to just put this together for other people, because I was creating it really for myself. But I'm like, I need to just share it out with the world.
Amazing. So, are there any last few things you want to share with us? Any other tips or books that you want to share?
I don't know. I do just want to tell people, you know, the most important thing that you can do is like it's to learn to grow. That's to secure your future. You should know where your food comes from. And even if you're not growing your own food, you should know how to grow your own food, you know, and you should be educated on those things. An educated populace is harder to get over on the educated populace. It's harder to control an educated populace. If we want, you know, land equity, if we want to feel equal in these situations, then we have to create those things for ourselves. We can't sit back and continue to wait for someone else to feed us, because they're not going to feed us the right things. That's something that I wanted to say earlier. The word food. I don't like using the word food, because when you look at the etymology of food, it is fodder. It was to feed livestock and to feed cattle and to feed beasts of the field. We need to be focused on sustenance. That's what we're missing. We missing sustenance, because we going to the store and we
Nice.
purchasing food. Yeah. So,
Oh, so words matter too, huh?
man, that is the most important thing. Confucius said the beginning of knowledge is to call things by their proper name. And that is so true. Even the word farm has a very distasteful origin. The word farm does not mean, or it doesn't, even though we use it the way we do today. But the word farm is meant a taxable, it was a fixed tax. So you know how they say we farming something out, right? Or farm teams and things of that nature. It's because the word farm was a fixed tax back in the day. Well, that was a piece of land that you got from the landlord to pay your taxes. Because no matter what, you had to pay those taxes. And we still use that word. We still enslaving ourselves to these words, first of all, and then to this food. We not gonna have justice until we start to realize like the bigger plan that's going on around us. When you use these words, and I'm pretty sure you understand this, especially when you use them in an academic sense or in a legal sense, then you kind of binding yourself to the contract of what these words mean. So we need to start changing the way we use these words so that we one can take back our minds in that sense and start saying what we really mean. And then two, we can start to have the people around us using the right words and saying what they really mean. Because if we don't, then we're gonna continue to be fighting for something that we can just take back. It starts at home, you know. It starts with us. You
You
on mute?
are amazing. You are amazing, and you and your family, you, your wife, and we just want to recognize you and let you know that we're here. I feel it, and I'm excited to see you. I hope to get to meet you sometime this year in person. We're going to have another in-person event. And check it out, everybody. This is the Global Food Justice and Health Equity Video Series 2022. And we just finished our talk with Mr. Keith Hudson and the Grocery Cropper, which is a local. He is basically running a food revolution. Okay, we're focusing on sustenance. I learned something new today. Less food and more sustenance. We
Mm-hmm.
love it. Thank you so much. So if someone wants to follow you, reach you, why don't you tell us where they can reach you and then we'll wrap it up.
Well, you can type in these words right here, grocery cropper, and you'll be able to find me anywhere that you are looking for me. I do have a website. It will be back up and running by fall. I'm revamping it and putting some more information on there. But I'm on probably everything: Facebook, Instagram, fan base, Twitter. There's so
Got
many
it.
social media sites. I'm everywhere. I say we live in the sea of energy, so I'm flowing through all of the chat waves and the wires and the sources. I'm a part of the spirit, the breath. So I'm everywhere. Just look for Grocery Croppers.